very much for taking the time again to speak to Kung Fu Kingdom.
I
It's
love
great
Kung
to
Fu
see
Kingdom.
you.
They're my favorite.
That's great. And we have you on our Hall of Fame, which is an absolute honor. Thank you for agreeing to...
Oh, I couldn't have been more honored. My mother said, one day I knew you'd make the Hall of Fame. You finally have.
Absolutely. Okay, so as our readers know, your book, Bruce Lee, A Life, is out, and people are reading it, digesting it, talking about it, and that's one of the things this conference, Bruce Lee's Cultural Legacies, is about, that's being put on by Martial Arts Studies. Now, we've noticed from some of the talks that people are citing your work, they're referencing it to posit their positions. But what sort of feedback have you been getting? What sort of response have you been getting from the book?
Well, first I have to say what a delight it is to have major scholars and academics cite my work. What I hoped to do with the book was to set a sort of baseline so that we all could agree on some basic facts about Bruce Lee's life, and then scholars could take it in their own interpretation. And so to see that happening at this conference, the first Bruce Lee conference ever thrown at a major university, is fantastic. I think the overall reaction to the book has been delightful. People seem to really enjoy it. And the thing I hoped was that they would see that it was written from a place of love, that I really love Bruce Lee. And so that's been the reaction. Of course, there's elements of the book where you talk about his flaws and his foibles, and you worry that people will think that you're trying to harsh someone. But no one seems to have reacted that way. So that's probably the happiest that I am, is that they can see that this was like a passion project for someone I truly admire.
Well, as you said, the book comes from a place of love, and but you are certainly forthright about some aspects of Bruce's life, philosophy, work. I actually asked Dr. Paul Bowman yesterday about the myth of Bruce Lee, that up until recently there was a concern that certainly in films like Birth of the Dragon, that the real life facts and information about Bruce was being sidelined, and he was sort of being mythologized, much in the same way that Wong Fai-hung, Ho Yun-ja, and more recently Ip Man in the films, they've kind of been turned into legends rather than getting to know the real person. Do you think there was a real danger of that happening with Bruce? And do you think that your book is maybe kind of demythologizing Bruce?
I think my book, what the attempt was to be a corrective.
Mm-hmm.
The first two biographies ever written about Bruce, about Alex Ben Block and Donna Toyo, were really trying to find out who Bruce Lee was, the man. And they were serious reporters who went out there, young guys who went out there to try to interview people and get the real thing. But there's always been a second tendency, which you see in Bruceploitation flicks, which is to turn him into a comic book character. And that's because he presented himself on screen as almost invincible. And so it was very easy to turn Bruce into someone who fights Dracula or James Bond. And there's all these arguments, could he beat the Hulk? Professor Paul Bowman gave a speech, like, could he beat Ali? Could he beat Iron Man? I've heard that debated. Well, he couldn't beat Iron Man.
Could he beat a gorilla? I think was one
Could
question.
he beat a gorilla?
Yeah.
And so I think that's fascinating that he presented himself in a way that's so easy to turn him into a comic book character. And that's the flaws of the biopics, is inevitably they start with life elements that are true, and then they turn it into a kung fu movie. And his life had elements of a kung fu movie, but the way they deal with it turns it into fiction. And biographies are supposed to be a corrective. We're supposed to get exactly who the person was, warts and all, and that's what I was trying to do. And so I hope so. I know that there's a lot of people who love Bruce Lee who wanted to know who he really was as a human being. And you can never get it perfect, but we can get closer to the truth. And my goal was to get as close to the truth as possible within the medium of books.
Do you have any thoughts on why there are people who feel that Bruce Lee the man on screen is Bruce Lee the man in real life? And I'll cite something specific that I've noticed. You mentioned Dragon Bruce Lee's story, and it's been mentioned throughout this conference. His portrayal as a fighter is very much in line with how we see him in movies, but everything we know and have read about Bruce is that he never did those yells, he never necessarily moved or always moved that way, that actually his response in a fight or in a demonstration is very stoic. So why can't some people make break the link between Bruce Lee, the man on screen as a fighter, and Bruce in real life?
Well, I think there's two elements. One is I think there's particularly a childish is too harsh, but when I was a kid, I wanted Bruce Lee to be perfect because we want our heroes to be perfect. And as we get older, we want to see them as human beings because we have a more complicated view of humanity. So I think there's a certain sort of childish desire to see Bruce as perfect. I also think he liked to present himself as lacking the typical weaknesses you see in characters. And that's because for so many years, Chinese characters in Western films, Bruce didn't, as an Asian character, didn't want to present himself as weak, and it became an image that we then see Jackie Chan reacting against, and so Bruce, the sort of perfect invincible hero, becomes an archetype.
Okay, and I think really the next question is going to be more about the conference. So
Sure.
Now, the title of the conference is Bruce Lee's Cultural Legacy, so we are celebrating, commemorating not his passing, but what he means to us since he's passed. Now, how are you finding the conference so far, and what role, or how important a role do you think it plays in preserving and evolving how we see Bruce?
I think it's crucial, and it's innovative, and it's a breakthrough. For 40 years, Bruce has been essentially sustained by the fans. He's a kind of almost a cult hero with a group of people who support him, and he gets played in the media and documentaries and the occasional biopic and then books put out by martial arts presses, but he's never treated as a serious figure who should be respected as part of high culture by the Academy. In my case, I was the first book ever put out by a major New York press publisher, and so what I'm hoping is there's a reevaluation of Bruce going on, where he's seen as an important cultural figure, not just a celebrity. And the reason why primarily is because through his films, he converted more people to martial arts and introduced more people to Asian culture than anyone that ever lived. And for that alone, he should be treated as a major cultural figure. And so I think this conference is long overdue, but very welcome because of it.
Okay, so let's just reflect on Bruce then and how we view him today. In researching your book and writing it, speaking to all the people who were willing to talk to you and share their stories of Bruce, in knowing the man as he was, flaws and all, how has that changed your perception of him?
The way it changed my perception has actually made me like him more in a very sort of base sort of reaction. The thing about Bruce is when he was presented, as his legend built over the years amongst fans, he became almost superhuman. And, you know, Superman is not impressive because if you're Superman, then what you achieve is not being able to fly, is just natural. But the truth is, Bruce was, he grew up and he was a kind of fragile child. He built himself up and he faced unbelievable obstacles. And seeing the kind of flaws and foibles that he had, he was still able to achieve greatness. And I find that more inspiring than when I was a kid and I thought of him as sort of invincible.
Do you find actually that when icons such as Bruce are humanized, if you like, for want of a better phrase maybe, that we do learn to appreciate them more because we see them almost in line with us?
I think that's, well, that was my goal, which is essentially to break down the myth, bring out the man, and then show why what he did was so impressive. So it's actually a two-part step. If you leave him as an icon, then what he does is not that impressive. But if you make him human again, then you can see the struggles. And so one of the things that's overplays in his book is just financial struggle, which I think we can all relate to. We've all had points where we didn't have enough money. And Bruce, throughout his life, had to make decisions purely for money, like going back to Hong Kong to make those first two movies, Big Boss and Fist of Fury. He did it for the cash. But that totally changed his life. And so if he hadn't been struggling, if he had been financially set, he never would have gone to Hong Kong and Bruce Lee's career would be completely different. And so the kind of context and the just fate the kind of twists and turns of any individual's life set a course one way or another, and that's sort of what I wanted to explore as well. He was not the master of his destiny. He was reacting to things that were happening in real time.
Okay, so just to wrap then, the title of the conference, as we know, is Bruce Lee's Cultural Legacies. Legacy obviously is the key word, and this is a question I've been asking people throughout these 2 days, and I'd like to put that question to you, which is, what do you feel is Bruce's lasting legacy to us all?
So Bruce Lee has, I would say, 3 lasting legacies. One is as a racial breakthrough, the first Chinese-American male actor to ever star in a Hollywood movie. That's something that Asian actors are still struggling with, even to this day. There's not, other than perhaps Jackie Chan, there's no one who's achieved what Bruce has, becoming a kind of icon as an Asian. His second legacy, as I mentioned before, is introducing more people to Asian culture than anyone else. And the third is, through that process, he began what's occurred since then, which is the merger of East and West. He was a bridge builder, and it's hard to remember, but how distant China and the East Asia felt to the West. And since Bruce sort of opened the door, there's been more and more cross-cultural influence. And so I think we should think of him as sort of a pioneer in that regard.